Ruth, starting December 1st, you'll need to pay $2,300 monthly rent for that bedroom, or you can find somewhere else to live. The words sliced through the warm Thanksgiving air like a blade through butter. I stared across the dining table at my daughter-in-law Cassandra, certain my hearing had failed me. Around us, 12 family members sat frozen, forks suspended halfway to their mouths, the gentle clinking of silverware suddenly absent. Hold up, I'm curious where you're listening from, and if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. The turkey I'd spent 4 hours preparing that morning turned to ash in my mouth. I'm sorry, what did you say? My voice came out smaller than I intended, barely above a whisper. Cassandra dabbed her perfectly glossed lips with the linen napkin, her freshly manicured nails catching the candlelight. You heard me correctly, Ruth. $2,300 per month for the guest bedroom. That's actually below market rate for this area. I'm being more than generous. My son David kept his eyes fixed firmly on his mashed potatoes, as if they held the secrets of the universe. My hands began to tremble as I slowly set down my fork. This was my house, the house that my late husband Franklin and I had purchased in 1987 with our life savings, the house where we'd raised our 2 children, the house I'd moved back into with David and Cassandra 3 years ago when they insisted I shouldn't live alone after Franklin's passing. If you're unable to afford it, Cassandra continued, her voice carrying that sickeningly sweet tone she'd perfected over the years, there's always Sunset Manor downtown. They have wonderful programs for senior citizens. My sister-in-law Janet gasped audibly, Cassandra, that's completely unreasonable. Cassandra smoothly cut her off with a wave of her hand. We simply cannot continue enabling someone who refuses to contribute their fair share. Enabling? After 43 years of marriage, after raising 2 children, after sacrificing my nursing career to support Franklin through his military deployments, after losing him to a sudden heart attack 2 years ago, I was being called an enabler, a burden, a freeloader in the house I had called home for over 30 decades. But what Cassandra didn't realize was that Franklin had been obsessively meticulous about documentation and legal matters. Keep every paper, Ruthie, he used to tell me, stroking my hand as we sat at this very table. Documentation protects everything we've built together. My name is Ruth Catherine Pemberton, and 3 years ago, I believed I had found sanctuary and comfort with my family during the darkest period of my life. I was 70 years old, newly widowed, and drowning in an ocean of grief so deep I could barely remember how to breathe. Franklin, my anchor for 4 decades, my best friend, my husband of 43 years, had collapsed suddenly while gardening in our backyard. The paramedics said it was massive and instantaneous. He never suffered, they assured me, but I suffered enough for both of us. We had built what I thought was a solid, respectable life together in Millbrook Heights. Nothing extravagant or showy, but dependable and honest. Franklin had worked in construction management after completing his military service, and I had been a registered nurse at Millbrook General Hospital until David was born. When our daughter Amanda came along 2 years later, I made the choice that countless women of my generation made without question. I stayed home to raise our children while Franklin provided for our family. I never regretted that decision, not for a single moment. We lived carefully, saved diligently, and in 1987, we purchased our 3-bedroom colonial house on Maple Grove Avenue. Franklin had qualified for a VA loan, and we were both practically glowing with pride as we signed those mortgage papers. This represents our security, Ruthie, Franklin had said that day, carefully folding the deed and placing it in our fireproof safe. No matter what challenges life throws at us, we own this piece of the world. Nobody can ever take this away from our family. The house was completely paid off by 2012. I still vividly remember our small celebration that evening. Just Franklin and me by then, since both children had grown up and established their own lives. Franklin grilled his famous barbecue chicken while I prepared his favorite three-bean salad, and we danced slowly in our kitchen to the same song that had played at our wedding reception decades earlier. 4 years later, Franklin received his devastating diagnosis: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months, but my stubborn, determined husband fought valiantly for 11 months before his body finally surrendered. After his funeral, I attempted to continue living alone in our house, but the rooms felt impossibly vast and eerily quiet. I found myself having long conversations with Franklin's empty recliner and automatically setting 2 place settings at breakfast out of pure habit. When David suggested that I move in with his family, at least temporarily until you feel stronger and more stable, it seemed like a blessing sent directly from heaven. My son genuinely wanted to care for me during my most vulnerable time. Cassandra had appeared so welcoming and enthusiastic about the arrangement, speaking warmly about how much the children missed having their grandmother nearby, and how wonderful it would be to have me as part of their daily routine. I sold most of my furniture to a local consignment shop, donated Franklin's extensive tool collection to the Veterans Organization downtown, and carefully packed only the belongings that would fit comfortably in their spacious guest bedroom. The house on Maple Grove Avenue remained empty, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Too many precious memories lived within those walls. David assured me that they would help me decide what to do with the property when I felt emotionally ready. The first 8 months of living with David's family were genuinely delightful. I prepared elaborate Sunday dinners, assisted 10-year-old Timothy and 8-year-old Sarah with their homework assignments, and felt useful and valued again for the first time since Franklin's death. Cassandra would join me for morning coffee, asking detailed questions about my life with Franklin and seeming genuinely fascinated by our stories. I truly believed I had discovered my new place in the world. Then something fundamental shifted in the household dynamics. Cassandra began making subtle but pointed comments about the additional laundry, the increased utility bills, and the extra groceries. She would release long, dramatic sighs whenever she encountered me in the kitchen, as if my mere presence drained her energy completely. The warmth and genuine affection in her voice gradually cooled to mere politeness, then deteriorated further into barely concealed irritation and resentment. David grew increasingly distant as well, always claiming to be overwhelmed with work responsibilities and carefully avoiding eye contact whenever Cassandra voiced her growing complaints about our living situation. I should have recognized the warning signs much earlier. The way Cassandra's mouth would tighten into a thin line when Timothy and Sarah would run excitedly to embrace me. How she began referring to me as your mother when speaking to David, never calling me Mom or Ruth anymore. The stack of assisted living facility brochures I discovered buried in their recycling bin one Tuesday morning. Franklin had always insisted that I keep our important deeds safely stored in our home safe. I had brought all of our crucial documents when I moved in with David's family, storing them securely in a locked box beneath my bed. But I trusted my son completely. I believed wholeheartedly that family bonds meant something sacred and unbreakable. I was about to discover just how devastatingly wrong my assumptions had been. We poured our hearts into researching and telling this story. If you're hooked, show some love with a subscribe. Now, where were we? The transformation didn't happen overnight. Looking back now, I can trace the exact timeline of how Cassandra's warmth slowly calcified into cold calculation. But at the time, grief had made me desperate for any semblance of family connection. I was willing to overlook red flags that should have sent me running. Those first 8 months truly felt like a gift from God. I had purpose again.
Every morning, I'd wake up in the cheerful guest bedroom with its pale yellow walls and white lace curtains, and I'd hear the familiar sounds of a family getting ready for their day. Timothy practicing piano scales in the living room, Sarah hunting for her missing homework folder, David brewing his morning coffee that was always slightly too strong, and Cassandra humming while she packed the children's lunches. I'd slip downstairs in my robe and slippers, and Cassandra would look up with genuine brightness in her eyes. "Good morning, Ruth. Sleep well?" She'd pour me a cup of coffee without being asked, remembering exactly how I liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. We'd sit at the kitchen island together while the children finished getting ready, and she'd ask about my plans for the day, my memories of Franklin, my thoughts on everything from current events to family recipes. Cassandra seemed genuinely fascinated by the stories of Franklin's military service and our early years of marriage. "Tell me about when David was little," she'd say, leaning forward with her chin in her hands like an eager student. "What was he like as a baby? Did he really try to feed the goldfish his mashed carrots?" I'd laugh, sharing memories that felt precious when spoken aloud to someone who actually wanted to hear them. I felt valued in ways I hadn't experienced since Franklin's death. The children would race home from school and burst through the door calling, "Grandma Ruth! Grandma Ruth!" Timothy would show me his math tests, beaming when I praised his improvement in long division. Sarah would curl up next to me on the couch, reading aloud from her library books while I helped her sound out difficult words. I was contributing something meaningful to their lives, and they were healing the gaping hole in mine. Sunday dinners became my specialty and my joy. I'd spend Saturday afternoon grocery shopping, carefully selecting the best cuts of meat and the freshest vegetables. Sunday mornings found me in the kitchen by 7, preparing elaborate feasts that brought the whole family together around the dining table. Pot roast with all the trimmings, baked chicken with herb stuffing, glazed ham with sweet potato casserole, meals that filled the house with aromas of love and tradition. Cassandra would rave about my cooking, insisting I write down recipes for her to keep. "Ruth, this cornbread is absolute perfection," she'd say, reaching for a second piece. "You simply must teach me your secret." David would nod in agreement, telling stories about how I'd made similar meals throughout his childhood. "Even when money was tight, Mom always made Sunday dinner special," he'd say. And I'd feel that warm glow of maternal pride that never quite fades, no matter how old your children become.
But somewhere around the 9-month mark, subtle changes began creeping into our daily interactions. Cassandra's morning greetings became slightly less enthusiastic. Her questions about my day shifted from genuine interest to polite obligation. The coffee she poured me was often lukewarm, as if she'd forgotten I was coming downstairs and had to reheat it quickly. The first real warning sign came disguised as casual conversation. Cassandra was sorting through utility bills at the kitchen counter while I prepared lunch for the children during their winter break from school. "You know, Ruth," she said without looking up from the papers, "I've been noticing our water and electric bills have increased quite a bit since you moved in. Just an observation, nothing to worry about, of course." I felt a strange flutter of anxiety in my chest. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. "I know I take longer showers than I probably should. Old habit from when Franklin and I had our own place. Would you like me to contribute something toward the utilities?" "Oh, goodness, no," Cassandra replied quickly, waving her hand dismissively. "Your family. I was just making an observation about household expenses in general." But the seed had been planted. Over the following weeks, similar comments began appearing with increasing frequency. Cassandra would sigh while sorting through what seemed like endless loads of laundry. "So much more washing since we became a household of 5, she'd mutter. Not quite loud enough for me to be certain whether she intended for me to hear. When I offered to do my own laundry separately, she insisted it was more efficient to wash everything together, but her tone suggested my offer was somehow inadequate or missing the point entirely. The grocery bills became another source of passive-aggressive commentary. Cassandra would return from her weekly shopping trips and begin unpacking bags with increasingly dramatic flourishes. "Goodness, food prices just keep climbing, don't they?"
she'd announce to no one in particular. It's remarkable how much more we're spending on groceries these days. When I suggested contributing money for food expenses, she'd give me that same dismissive wave. Don't be silly, Ruth, you're our guest. Guest. The word began appearing more frequently in her vocabulary, always delivered with a slight emphasis that made it sound temporary and conditional. When Timothy asked if I could help him with a school project about family history, Cassandra intervened smoothly. Grandpa Ruth is our guest, sweetheart. We shouldn't burden her with homework responsibilities. When Sarah wanted me to attend her school play, Cassandra suggested it might be awkward. The other parents expect to see immediate family members, Ruth. As our guest, you might feel out of place. David seemed oblivious to his wife's shifting attitude, or perhaps he was willfully blind to it. He'd nod along with her comments about increased expenses without really listening, his attention usually focused on his phone or work documents. When I tried to broach the subject with him directly, asking if I was becoming a burden on the household, he'd look genuinely confused. "Mom, you're being ridiculous," he'd say, giving me a distracted hug. "Cassandra loves having you here. We all do. You're helping us more than we're helping you." But I noticed he never had these conversations within Cassandra's earshot, and he never confronted her about the comments I'd mentioned. The children began receiving subtle redirection away from spending time with me. When Timothy would bound into my room after school, eager to tell me about his day, Cassandra would appear in the doorway moments later. "Timothy, honey, Grandma Ruth needs a rest. Why don't you work on your homework instead?" When Sarah wanted to help me bake cookies on Saturday afternoons, Cassandra would suddenly remember piano practice or playdates that needed immediate attention. I started noticing Cassandra having hushed phone conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered the room. She'd been talking animatedly, but would suddenly shift to casual pleasantries. "Oh, I should let you go. Ruth just came in, and I'm sure she needs something." The implication was clear. My presence was an interruption, a complication that required management and navigation. The breaking point of this gradual erosion came approximately 18 months after I'd moved in. Cassandra received a significant promotion at her marketing firm, jumping from account coordinator to regional director with a salary increase that nearly doubled her income. I was genuinely happy for her success and told her so repeatedly. She'd worked hard and deserved the recognition and financial reward. But the promotion seemed to flip a switch in Cassandra's personality. Suddenly, she was researching expensive home renovations, talking about upgrading their lifestyle to match their new income bracket, and making pointed comments about maximizing the value of their real estate investment. Every conversation somehow circled back to money, property values, and what she called optimizing their living situation. The house projects began almost immediately. A landscape designer to redo the backyard, a contractor to install granite countertops in the kitchen, plans for a master bathroom renovation, and a finished basement that would serve as David's home office. All wonderful improvements that I complimented enthusiastically, but I couldn't help noticing that my bedroom was pointedly excluded from any upgrade discussions. Instead, my space began feeling increasingly shabby by comparison. The pale yellow walls that had once seemed cheerful now looked faded next to the fresh paint in other rooms. My simple furniture appeared outdated and cheap compared to the new pieces Cassandra was selecting for the rest of the house. I began to feel like a relic from a previous era, tolerated but not truly belonging in this newly elevated household.
The final straw in this gradual transformation came when I discovered a stack of assisted living brochures hidden in the recycling bin. Glossy pamphlets for Sunset Manor, Golden Years Village, and Peaceful Meadows Senior Community, all featuring smiling elderly residents engaged in supervised activities, all emphasizing independence and community support, all clearly researched with me in mind. When I confronted Cassandra about the brochures, she didn't deny researching them. "I was just gathering information, Ruth," she said calmly, "in case you ever wanted to explore your options for more independence and social opportunities with people your own age. There's no shame in considering all possibilities for your future happiness." But I was happy. At least, I had been happy until the constant suggestions that I was a burden began wearing away at my confidence and sense of belonging. I was healthy, active, and contributing to the household in meaningful ways. I wasn't ready for supervised activities and communal dining, but Cassandra was clearly ready for me to consider those alternatives. That night, I lay in my increasingly inadequate bedroom and realized that the woman who had once poured my coffee with genuine warmth had been methodically laying the groundwork for my departure. Every comment about expenses, every redirection of the children's attention, every casual mention of my status as a guest had been building toward this moment. The question was no longer whether Cassandra wanted me gone. The question was how far she was willing to go to make that happen. The transformation accelerated dramatically over the summer months leading up to that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. What had been subtle manipulation evolved into open hostility, and I found myself walking on eggshells in what was supposed to be my safe haven. Cassandra's promotion had given her not just financial confidence, but an arrogance that seemed to grow with each passing week. The home renovation projects became her obsession and my daily torment. Contractors tramped through the house at all hours, measuring, hammering, and disrupting any sense of peace I might have found. When I politely asked about the construction schedule so I could plan my day around the noise, Cassandra looked at me as if I'd suggested something utterly ridiculous. "Ruth, this is our house and our investment," she said, not bothering to look up from the granite samples spread across the dining table. "You'll need to adjust your schedule around our improvements. If the noise bothers you, perhaps you could spend your days at the library or the senior center. There are programs there specifically designed for people in your situation." People in my situation. I was a 70-year-old woman living with family, not a problem requiring specialized programming. But Cassandra had developed an entire vocabulary designed to diminish my presence and my dignity. Everything about me had become a situation to be managed rather than a relationship to be cherished. The kitchen renovation was particularly brutal because it eliminated my ability to contribute in the way that had always given me the most joy. For 6 weeks, we had no functioning stove or oven, which meant no Sunday dinners and no opportunities for me to show love through cooking. Cassandra hired a meal delivery service during the construction, pointedly mentioning the additional expense at every opportunity. "This temporary food situation is costing us nearly $400 extra per week," she announced during one dinner of lukewarm takeout. "It's really quite shocking how much more expensive it becomes when you can't cook at home." I offered repeatedly to contribute money toward the meal service, but she'd wave away my suggestions while simultaneously making sure I understood the financial burden my presence represented. During this same period, I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. While organizing papers in what used to be Franklin's desk, I found documents that made no sense. Credit card statements addressed to me, but for accounts I'd never opened. Medical bills for services I'd never received. Most disturbing of all, there were inquiries from financial institutions about something called a reverse mortgage on my property in Millbrook Heights. When I confronted David about these mysterious documents, he seemed genuinely confused, but also strangely defensive. "Mom, I handle some of your paperwork now to help you out," he said, avoiding my direct gaze. "Sometimes there are administrative errors or mixed up mail. Don't worry about it." But I was worried. I'd never asked him to handle my paperwork, and I certainly hadn't authorized anyone to make inquiries about my house. Cassandra's attitude toward the children's relationships with me became increasingly controlling. She implemented new rules about homework time, limiting when Timothy and Sarah could visit my room or ask for my help with projects. "The children are becoming too dependent on you for entertainment," she explained when I questioned these restrictions. "They need to develop independence and rely on their parents for guidance." Independence.
another word that Cassandra wielded like a weapon. She began suggesting that I needed more independence too, perhaps through senior community programs or volunteer opportunities that would get me out of the house during the day. "Have you considered joining the activities at Sunset Manor?" she asked one morning while reviewing what appeared to be a calendar of my theoretical schedule. They have day programs for people who want to socialize with their peers while maintaining their housing independence. The implication was clear. I should be grateful for housing independence while accepting social segregation by age. I should want to spend my days with other elderly people rather than contributing to the family I'd helped raise. When I mentioned that I enjoyed being around Timothy and Sarah, learning about their school projects and watching them grow, Cassandra's expression hardened.
"Ruth, you're not their primary caregiver," she said coolly. "David and I make the decisions about their education and social development. Your role here is as our guest, not as a co-parent or substitute teacher. Perhaps some healthy boundaries would benefit everyone involved." Boundaries. The word that would haunt me for months to come. According to Cassandra, healthy boundaries meant that I should limit my interaction with my own grandchildren, contribute financially without having any input into household decisions, and accept whatever living arrangements she deemed appropriate. These weren't boundaries. They were restrictions designed to make me feel like an unwelcome intruder. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning in early November. I woke up to find Cassandra in my bedroom, standing over my dresser with a stack of official-looking papers in her hands. She wasn't trying to hide what she was doing. In fact, she seemed to want me to see her examining my personal documents. "Ruth, we need to have a serious conversation about your financial situation and your long-term housing plans," she said without any preamble or apology for invading my privacy. "I've been reviewing your assets and income, and I think we need to explore some options that would benefit everyone involved." My heart started pounding. "You've been reviewing my assets? Without my permission? How did you even access my personal financial information?" Cassandra sat down on my bed as if she belonged there, spreading the papers across my quilt like she was conducting a business meeting in my most private space. "David has power of attorney for some of your affairs," she said matter-of-factly. "We've been monitoring your accounts to make sure you're not being taken advantage of by scammers or making poor financial decisions. It's really quite common for adult children to oversee their elderly parents' finances. Nothing unusual or inappropriate about it." But David didn't have power of attorney over my finances. I'd never signed any such document, and I was completely capable of managing my own money. When I told Cassandra this, she gave me a patronizing smile that made my skin crawl. "Ruth, you may not remember signing the paperwork," she said in the tone one might use with a confused child. "Memory issues are very common at your age. The important thing is that your finances are being properly managed and your future is being planned appropriately." She handed me a brochure for an assisted living facility. "I've scheduled a tour for you next week, just to explore your options." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Franklin's insistence on documentation and proper record-keeping. I remembered him telling me to keep our important papers secure and to never let anyone pressure me into making financial decisions quickly. "Document everything, Ruthie," he used to say. "And never let anyone convince you that you're not capable of understanding your own business." I spent the early morning hours before dawn carefully reviewing every document in my locked box. The deed to our house on Maple Grove Avenue was exactly as it should be. My name and Franklin's name as joint owners with automatic transfer to me upon his death. I owned that house completely and clearly. No one else had any claim to it. And I certainly hadn't given anyone power of attorney over my finances. I also found the documentation for our original mortgage, which showed that we'd paid off the house in full in 2012. There was no current mortgage, no outstanding debt, and no legitimate reason for anyone to be making inquiries about reverse mortgages on my property.
Someone had been using my personal information without authorization, and I had a sinking feeling about who that someone might be. The next morning, I called our longtime family attorney, Walter Brennan, who had handled Franklin's will and helped us with various legal matters over the years. "Walter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to ask you some questions about powers of attorney and financial fraud. I think someone might be using my identity for unauthorized purposes." Walter's concern was immediate and serious. "Ruth, can you come in today, this afternoon if possible? Don't discuss this with anyone else until we've had a chance to review everything together. And Ruth, bring all your financial documents, identification, and any paperwork you've been asked to sign recently, even if you don't remember signing it." As I gathered my documents that afternoon, preparing for what I suspected would be a life-changing conversation with Walter, I realized that Franklin had been preparing me for this moment all along. His careful record-keeping, his insistence on documentation, his repeated reminders about protecting what we'd built together. It had all been leading to this day when I would need to defend our life's work against people who were supposed to protect it. I was about to discover just how extensive the betrayal had become, and just how much power I actually possessed to fight back. But first, I had to find the courage to use that power, even if it meant destroying relationships I thought were unbreakable. Franklin had left me more than a house and a lifetime of memories. He'd left me the tools to protect both, if I was brave enough to use them. Walter Brennan's office felt like a sanctuary that Thursday afternoon. After 40 years of handling our family's legal matters, Walter had become more than our attorney. He was Franklin's old friend and someone I trusted completely. When I spread my documents across his mahogany desk, I watched his expression shift from professional concern to genuine alarm.
"Ruth, this is much worse than you described on the phone," he said, adjusting his reading glasses as he examined the credit card statements and loan applications. "These signatures aren't even close to yours. See here?" He pointed to a document with my supposed signature. "Your handwriting has a distinctive backward slant on the capital letters. This signature is clearly forged by someone who didn't study your actual writing carefully enough." My hands shook as I picked up the paper. Someone had attempted to open a home equity line of credit against my house for $75,000. The application was dated just 6 weeks ago, right around the time Cassandra had begun her renovation projects. Walter pulled out a magnifying glass and examined several other documents I'd brought. "Ruth, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to answer them honestly," he said gently. "Have you given anyone permission to act on your behalf financially? Have you signed any powers of attorney recently? Have you authorized anyone to access your accounts or make inquiries about your property?" My answers were clear and consistent. No, no, and absolutely not. Walter leaned back in his leather chair, his face grave. "What we're looking at here is identity theft and fraud, possibly elder abuse. Someone has been systematically attempting to gain access to your assets using forged documents. The question is whether they've been successful, and more importantly, what other damage they might have done that we haven't discovered yet." We spent the next 2 hours conducting what Walter called a forensic review of my financial situation. He made calls to credit reporting agencies, banks, and government offices using his legal credentials to access information I couldn't have obtained on my own. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its scope and calculation. 7 different credit card accounts had been opened in my name over the past 18 months. The total debt accumulated was over $32,000. None of these accounts had ever sent statements to my address because the mailing information had been changed to a post office box I'd never rented. The box was registered under my name, but with a signature that didn't match mine and an identification document that Walter suspected was fraudulent. "There's more, Ruth," Walter said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Someone has been paying the minimum balances on these cards to keep them current, which suggests they're planning something bigger. They're maintaining your credit score artificially while building up debt.
This isn't random fraud. This is a long-term strategy. The attempted home equity loan was just the beginning. Walter discovered 2 other applications for loans against my property, both denied because the signatures raised red flags with careful loan officers. Someone had also contacted my insurance company, claiming to be my authorized representative and asking detailed questions about my policy coverage and beneficiary information. Most chilling of all, Walter found evidence that someone had been researching the legal requirements for declaring an elderly person incompetent. Recent internet searches linked to an email address I'd never seen showed queries about guardianship proceedings, power of attorney laws, and the process for institutionalizing someone against their will. Ruth, Walter said, removing his glasses and cleaning them slowly, I've been practicing elder law for 30 years, and this is one of the most comprehensive fraud schemes I've encountered. Whoever's doing this has been planning for a very long time. They're not just trying to steal money. They're trying to steal your entire life. The evidence was overwhelming, but proving who was responsible would require more investigation. Walter explained that while the circumstantial evidence pointed towards someone with intimate access to my personal information, we needed documented proof that would hold up in court. That's when he suggested something that made my stomach turn. We need to set a trap, he said, matter-of-factly. If my suspicions are correct, this person will make another move soon. They've invested too much time and effort to stop now. We need to give them an opportunity to incriminate themselves, but in a controlled way that protects you and provides us with evidence. Walter's plan was elegant in its simplicity. He would prepare legitimate-looking documents suggesting that I was considering selling my house and moving into assisted living. We would leave these documents where they could be easily discovered by whoever had been accessing my personal information. Then we would wait to see what happened. The bait included fake correspondence from a real estate agent about listing my property, a genuine brochure from Sunset Manor that Walter had requested, and most importantly, a letter from a fictitious financial advisor suggesting that I had significant assets that needed to be managed during my transition to assisted living. Anyone who saw these documents would believe I was planning major financial moves that could be intercepted or influenced. I spent that weekend playing my part carefully. I left the documents on my dresser where they could be seen by anyone entering my room. I mentioned to David and Cassandra that I'd been thinking about my future housing options and might need some help understanding my finances. I watched carefully for any reaction or sign that my conversation was being reported to someone else. The trap worked faster than Walter had anticipated. On Monday morning, I discovered that the documents on my dresser had been moved slightly. Someone had clearly examined them and tried to replace them in their original positions. That afternoon, Cassandra approached me with an expression of concerned helpfulness that I now recognized as completely fake.
Ruth, David mentioned that you're thinking about some major life changes, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed uninvited. I want you to know that we're here to support you through any transitions you might be considering. In fact, I've been doing some research myself about senior living options and financial planning for elderly people. She pulled out a folder containing papers I'd never seen before. I found some wonderful resources for people in your situation, she continued. There are specialists who help seniors navigate the complexities of property sales, asset management, and institutional care. I could arrange some consultations for you if you'd like. The specialists she was recommending were all people I'd never heard of, with credentials that sounded impressive but vague. What struck me most was how quickly she'd assembled this information. Either she'd been researching these options for months, or she had connections to these people that preceded my supposed interest in making changes. Cassandra's urgency became more apparent as the week progressed. She began scheduling appointments for me without asking my permission first. I've arranged for you to meet with a financial advisor on Thursday, she announced Tuesday morning. And there's a lovely representative from Sunset Manor who can give you a private tour Friday afternoon. I thought it would be helpful for you to explore all your options while you're in this decision-making phase. When I told her I wasn't ready to make appointments yet, that I was still thinking about my options, her mask of helpfulness slipped slightly.
Ruth, you can't put these decisions off indefinitely, she said with an edge in her voice. At your age, procrastination can be financially devastating. The longer you wait, the fewer options you'll have available. The pressure was constant and relentless. Every conversation somehow circled back to my need to make immediate decisions about my living situation and my finances. Cassandra began involving David in these discussions, presenting a united front about their concern for my welfare and their willingness to help me navigate these complex choices. The breakthrough came Wednesday evening when I returned from dinner with my neighbor Dorothy to find Cassandra on the phone in the kitchen. She was speaking quietly, but I caught enough of the conversation to understand that she was discussing my financial situation with someone else, sharing details about my supposed plans that I'd never told her. Yes, she's finally ready to move forward, Cassandra was saying. The house should bring at least $400,000, maybe more with the right agent. And she's agreed to let us handle the transition details while she focuses on settling into the facility. It should all be finalized within 60 days. I'd never agreed to any such thing. I'd never even decided to sell my house or move into a facility. But Cassandra was already making plans based on assumptions she'd manufactured entirely on her own. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she ended the call quickly and turned toward me with that practiced smile I'd come to despise. "Ruth, how was dinner with Dorothy?" she asked brightly. As if she hadn't just been discussing the sale of my property without my knowledge or consent. "I hope you had a lovely time. Did you mention your exciting plans for the future?" That night, I called Walter from my bedroom, speaking quietly into the phone while my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and fury. "Walter, she's moving faster than we expected. I think she's already making arrangements based on plans I never made. How quickly can we act to stop this?" "Ruth," Walter's voice was steady and reassuring. "Tomorrow morning, we're filing for emergency protective orders and notifying the authorities. You've done exactly what we needed you to do. Now it's time to turn the tables and show these people that you're not the helpless victim they think you are." The next day would bring the confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had the power to fight back. Franklin had been right about documentation, and Walter had been right about setting a trap. Now it was time to spring it on the people who thought they could steal my entire life while pretending to care about my welfare. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of finality. Walter had spent the previous evening coordinating with the district attorney's office, the police department's financial crimes unit, and a forensic accountant who specialized in elder fraud cases. Today would be the day that months of careful manipulation and systematic theft would finally be exposed. I woke up early, showered carefully, and dressed in my best navy blue suit, the one Franklin had always said made me look like I could run the bank instead of just banking there. If I was going to confront the people who tried to steal my life, I wanted to look like someone who deserved respect and got it. At precisely 9 o'clock, Walter arrived with Detective Maria Santos from the Financial Crimes Unit and Patricia Chen, the forensic accountant. They carried briefcases full of evidence and wore expressions of professional determination that gave me courage I didn't know I still possessed. Cassandra was in the kitchen when we walked in, dressed in her usual expensive athleisure wear and scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee from a mug that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. When she looked up and saw our small army of legal professionals, her face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, irritation, calculation, and finally, poorly concealed panic.
"Ruth, what's going on?" she asked, setting down her phone with carefully controlled movements. "Are you feeling all right? You didn't mention having appointments this morning." Her voice carried that familiar tone of condescending concern, but I could hear the underlying tension now that I knew what to listen for. Walter stepped forward with the quiet authority that had made him such an effective attorney for 4 decades. "Ms. Patterson, I'm Walter Brennan, Mrs. Pemberton's legal counsel. This is Detective Santos and forensic accountant Patricia Chen. We're here to discuss some serious financial irregularities that have come to our attention regarding Mrs. Pemberton's accounts and property." I watched Cassandra's face carefully as Walter spoke. She was working hard to maintain her composure, but I could see the calculations running behind her eyes. How much did we know? How much could we prove? What was her best strategy for damage control? I'm not sure what you're referring to, she said smoothly. Ruth handles her own finances. We've occasionally helped her with paperwork when she's felt confused or overwhelmed, but only at her specific request and always with her full knowledge and consent. Detective Santos opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. Ma'am, we have evidence of 7 fraudulent credit card accounts opened in Mrs. Pemberton's name, multiple forged loan applications, and unauthorized use of her personal information for financial gain. We also have documentation of attempts to access her property deed and insurance information without her knowledge or consent. Cassandra stared at the documents with what appeared to be genuine confusion, but I wasn't fooled anymore. This is obviously some kind of mistake, she said, reaching for her phone. I should call David. He'll want to know that someone has been targeting his mother with identity theft. We've been so worried about exactly this kind of thing happening to elderly people. David, I said quietly. My voice was steadier than I had expected it to be. Call David. Let's see what he has to say about these documents. Let's see if he's as surprised as you're pretending to be. Cassandra made the call on speakerphone, her hands trembling slightly as she dialed. David answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting. Hey, babe. What's up? I'm in a meeting, but I can talk for a minute. David, Cassandra said, working to keep her voice level. There are some people here with your mother, police and lawyers. They're saying someone has been stealing her identity and forging documents. Can you come home right away? The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. When David finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. What kind of documents? He asked, and I could hear the knowledge and guilt in those 4 words. Detective Santos leaned toward the phone. Mr. Patterson, this is Detective Santos with the Millbrook Police Department. We have evidence of extensive financial fraud targeting your mother, including forged signatures on loan applications and unauthorized credit accounts. We'd like to speak with you as soon as possible. Another long pause. I'm on my way, David said finally, and hung up without saying goodbye to his wife or asking any of the questions an innocent person would have asked. While we waited for David to arrive, Patricia Chen walked Cassandra through the evidence methodically and relentlessly. The credit card applications showed a clear pattern. Each one had been submitted shortly after Cassandra had major expenses, like her home renovations or luxury purchases. The attempted loan applications coincided with her promotion and salary increase, suggesting someone who felt entitled to access larger amounts of money. Most damning of all was the timeline Patricia had constructed showing when each fraudulent account was opened in relation to my daily activities. Every single application had been submitted on days when I was out of the house for extended periods. My weekly grocery shopping trips, my occasional lunches with Dorothy, my monthly doctor appointments. Someone with intimate knowledge of your schedule and access to your personal information has been timing these applications very carefully, Patricia explained. This wasn't opportunistic fraud. This was calculated, systematic, and planned well in advance. When David arrived 20 minutes later, he looked like a man walking to his own execution. His face was pale, his clothes wrinkled, and his hands shook as he kissed my cheek in greeting. The gesture felt hollow and performed, like he was playing the role of loving son for an audience that already knew the truth. Walter didn't waste time with pleasantries. David, we have substantial evidence that someone close to your mother has been committing identity theft and financial fraud. We have forged documents, unauthorized credit applications, and evidence of attempts to gain access to her property deed and insurance information without her knowledge or consent. What can you tell us about these activities? David looked at Cassandra, then at me, and back at the documents spread across the kitchen island. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of maintaining his deception had finally become too much to bear. "Mom, I'm sorry." And those 3 words contained more truth than anything he had said to me in months. Detective Santos read them their rights while I watched my son and daughter-in-law realize that their carefully constructed scheme was collapsing around them. The woman who'd demanded rent money I never owed was now facing charges for attempting to steal everything I actually did own. The arrests were swift and efficient. David wept as they handcuffed him, apologizing repeatedly and blaming Cassandra's influence for decisions he claimed he'd never wanted to make. Cassandra maintained her innocence even as they led her to the police car, insisting that everything had been a misunderstanding and that she'd been trying to help me manage my affairs responsibly. After they were gone, I sat in my kitchen, in my house, and felt a strange mixture of relief and devastation. Justice was being served, but the cost was the destruction of relationships I'd thought were unbreakable. Walter sat across from me, his expression kind but professional. "Ruth, the financial damage can be repaired," he said gently. "We'll get the fraudulent accounts closed, the debt transferred to the people who actually incurred it, and your credit record cleaned up. Your house was never in real danger because they never succeeded in getting valid signatures on the loan documents. But I know this doesn't feel like a victory right now." He was right. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival, which was better than defeat, but still carried a heavy price. Over the following weeks, as the legal proceedings moved forward and the financial cleanup began, I had to rebuild not just my security, but my sense of who I could trust and how I wanted to live. The house felt different with David and Cassandra gone. Quieter, but also more peaceful. I could cook in my renovated kitchen without feeling like I was imposing. I could sit in any room without wondering if I was being watched or judged. For the first time in months, I felt at home in my own home. Dorothy became my daily companion and closest confidant, helping me process the betrayal and plan for my future. The senior center that Cassandra had tried to use as a threat became a source of genuine community and friendship. I volunteered with their financial literacy program, helping other elderly people recognize the warning signs of fraud and abuse. Timothy and Sarah, my grandchildren, were the most difficult part of the aftermath. They were staying with Cassandra's mother while the legal situation resolved, and I had to carefully navigate my relationship with them through supervised visits and phone calls. They didn't understand why their parents were gone or why family gatherings had stopped happening. 3 months after that Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything, I received a letter from David. He was awaiting trial but had been released on bail, working with his attorney to negotiate a plea agreement. The letter was full of apologies and explanations, but what struck me most was his request to rebuild our relationship slowly and carefully once his legal situation was resolved. I wrote back, telling him that forgiveness was possible, but that trust would have to be earned through actions, not words. That boundaries weren't punishments, but necessities for healthy relationships. That I loved him, but that love didn't require me to accept abuse or manipulation from anyone, including my own children. Cassandra received a sentence of 4 years in federal prison for identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse. David received 18 months of probation and community service, partly because he cooperated with the investigation, and partly because the judge recognized that he'd been influenced by his wife's manipulation. Both were required to pay full restitution for the financial damage they had caused. A year later, I still live in my house on Maple Grove Avenue. It's worth significantly more now thanks to the renovations that were paid for with my stolen money, but legally became mine when the courts sorted out the financial mess. I have a small circle of close friends, a meaningful volunteer role, and the satisfaction of knowing I stood up for myself when it mattered most. David and I have coffee once a month now, carefully rebuilding a relationship based on honesty rather than obligation. He's divorced, struggling financially due to the restitution payments, and working hard to regain visitation rights with his children. We don't talk about forgiveness much, but we're learning to talk to each other like adults who respect boundaries. I'm 73 years old now, and I own my home free and clear. I know my worth,
I protect my independence, and I've learned that family loyalty should never require accepting abuse from anyone, including my own children. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even when the people hurting you are the ones you love most. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is teaching them that you won't accept being treated as less than fully human. That lesson serves everyone well, even when it's painful to learn. Two more compelling stories are just a click away. If this one drew you in, wait until you see what else we found. Ready to explore?